Welcome to Unlocking Passion, the Women's Edit. Let's begin with a news story. Behind the radiant smile of a dedicated nurse, there was a pain that no one was supposed to see. Maureen B. was 38 years old and worked on an oncology ward in Bristol, where she was not only fighting for the lives of her patients. Her life was a constant balancing act between highly functional professionalism and a deep, barely visible emotional exhaustion. Every day she gave everything for others, empathetic, strong, a rock in the storm for those battling illness. But inside herself, there was often a void. At the age of 19, she had lost her brother to leukemia, a trauma that had marked her soul forever. Since then, she had lived for others, a silent obligation to place something meaningful in the path of death. But she rarely lived for herself. It was as if, after the loss of her brother, she had made an invisible vow never to live only for herself again, never again to risk being hurt so deeply. This burden weighed heavily on her heart and increasingly isolated her from the world she had once known. Marlon was divorced, childless, and lived alone. Her contact with her family was sparse, another source of unspoken pain. She often felt like a shadow of herself, strong and unshakable on the outside, but fragile and empty on the inside. This inner conflict drove her to search for direction, for something to hold on to that might help her find herself again. There, in the seemingly endless stream of digital offers, she came across an online seminar with the promising title, Exhausted, but Not Empty. Emotional Healing for Helpers. A small flame of hope ignited within her. A quiet feeling that perhaps there really was a way to heal her own soul. The words of the seminar sounded like an answer to a prayer she had never spoken aloud. They promised not only relief, but a restoration of her inner balance, a return to the Marlene she once had been, or believed herself to be. Maureen clicked tiredly through YouTube. An evening like so many others. Suddenly, an advertisement appeared that made her pause. The title of the seminar promised exactly what she had been looking for. The speaker in the video was Darian L. Gentle. His voice had an almost meditative quality, completely unobtrusive. He was 44 years old and introduced himself as a relationship coach and trauma therapist. His presence was charismatic. His words seemed to speak directly to her heart. Marlene signed up, driven by a quiet but persistent hope. For her, it was an act of courage, because she had spent so long learning to hide her vulnerability. She had no idea that this click would change her life forever. During the webinar, Darian asked a question that shook Marlene to her core. A question that laid bare her suppressed pain, like a scalpel opening an old wound. He asked, "When was the last time you felt that someone meant you, not what you do? When was the last time someone truly saw you?" In that moment, something inside Marlene broke. A flood of tears that she had held back for so long rose within her. It was as if this man, whom she had never met in person, had recognized the deepest secret of her soul, the invisible burden she carried every day. She felt seen, meant, understood in a way no one had given her since the death of her brother. Darian was her anchor, a promise of healing in a world she had come to see only as a burden. The relief was overwhelming, a feeling as if a stone weighing tons had been lifted from her chest. She clung to that feeling, to Darian's words, like a shipwrecked person clinging to a lifeboat. Every sentence of his seemed to fill an emptiness inside her that she had not even known existed. The pain of the years, the loneliness, all of it seemed in that one moment to transform into pure hope. A promise of a life that she no longer had to merely dream about. Would you like to see more true crime documentaries like this that get under your skin? Then subscribe to my channel now and do not miss any new videos. Let us shed light together on the dark sides of human abysses and never forget the stories of the victims. After the webinar, the unexpected happened. Darian wrote her a private message. Not in the general chat, but directly. "I sense something in you," he wrote. Something real, pure, that has not yet been allowed to breathe. You are a helping soul. But who helps you? Marlene replied cautiously, almost shyly at first, then more and more intensely every day. They were not flirtations, not empty compliments, only depth. He spoke about her grief, her exhaustion, her unspoken longings, words that no one had ever said to her before, words that exposed her and at the same time held her. He seemed to read her thoughts, to touch her hidden wounds without ever being physically close to her. The intensity of his messages was like a warm current flowing around her soul and giving her the feeling that she was no longer alone. Every day without a message from Darian was a lost day, a feeling as if the air to breathe was missing. His words became her oxygen. He did not call her sweet or beautiful, terms that had always seemed superficial to her. Instead, he called her real, clear, and wounded. He spoke of her scars as evidence of her strength, of her exhaustion as a sign of her boundless empathy. Marlene felt not only understood but also validated in her pain, in her self-sacrifice. She began to live in his messages. Every notification from him was like a ray of hope in her gray everyday life, a promise of a deeper existence. The world around her faded, while Darian's words became the only reality in which she still breathed. He became her only confidant, her light in the darkness, a man who seemed to touch her soul. Her phone became the gateway to another dimension in which Darian was the key to her true self. Her colleagues at the clinic noticed her absence, the distracted looks, but no one suspected the depth of the emotional bond developing in secret. Marlene's smile became rarer, her walk more sluggish, her thoughts circled only around the next message, the next webinar with Darian. He had promised to lead her out of her exhaustion, but in truth he was leading her deeper and deeper into a dependency she could not recognize, because she longed so desperately for salvation. 3 weeks later came the invitation that would seal Marlene's fate. Darian invited her to a retreat. 5 women, 3 men. Deep soul work, silence, reconnection. The place was a quiet house in the English countryside, far away from any civilization. Marlene drove there excited, but filled with unshakable hope. She longed for this reconnection, for a community of like-minded people who also carried the burden of helping. The thought of spending several days without distractions, only here and now, working on her soul, filled her with a deep, almost spiritual anticipation. It was her chance finally to let the mask fall. She packed her suitcase with a mixture of nervousness and the feeling of taking a sacred oath, of setting out on a pilgrimage to her true self. There was no signal there, no Wi-Fi, only silence, warming herbal tea, and profound conversations with Darian. He did not seem like a coach giving instructions. He seemed like someone who was simply there, fully present, attentive. He listened when the other women spoke, and his looks seemed to penetrate Marlene, to understand her unspoken questions. The atmosphere was a mixture of meditation and psychological exposure that Marlene experienced as profound. She felt safe, sheltered in this bubble of supposed healing, far away from the clinic, the suffering, the everyday life that exhausted her so much. The other participants also seemed trapped in Darian's aura, openly speaking about their fears and longings. For Marlene, it was the beginning of a true transformation, a place where she was finally allowed to be herself, without having to wear the mask of the strong nurse. The absence of outside influences intensified Darian's power. His voice, his gestures, his supposed wisdom filled every room, every gap in Marlene's thoughts. She absorbed his words, interpreted every smile, every gesture as confirmation of her special connection to him. The days passed like a dream, blurring into one single long feeling of safety and being understood. The doubts that had once plagued her dissolved in the appearance of his undivided attention. She was finally home, she thought. In his world, in his care. On the last evening, they sat on the terrace. The stars shone clearly above the English countryside. The air was cool and pure. Marlene felt a deep connection to Darian, a closeness that surpassed everything she had known before. She asked quietly, "And what happens when we are back, when everyday life catches up with us again?" Darian took her hand. His touch was gentle, almost tender. He looked deep into her eyes and said quietly, his voice full of regret, "There is more between us than work, Marlene. You feel that too, don't you? A connection that goes beyond this retreat." Marlene's heart beat faster. Finally, this was what she had longed for so long. The air crackled with expectation. A sweet, intoxicating promise seemed within reach. But then came the catch, subtle and yet devastating. He spoke of blockages, of unresolved dependencies still slumbering inside her. "I could never truly love you, Marlene, as long as you are still internally connected to other energies, as long as you do not break these old chains." He spoke of an energetic cleansing, a profound process that was necessary to make their true soul connection possible. "If you want to free yourself, if you truly want to be free, I offer you one-to-one soul work. The price, £3,300. He called it energetic balance for the intensive personal work necessary to free her soul. Marlene called it hope. It was the promise of a true, deep love, of a life she had only dreamed about. That very same night, driven by the unconditional desire for this love and the fear of losing it again, she transferred the money. She felt no doubt, only the burning feeling that she would finally receive everything she longed for. The amount was high, yes, but the prospect of a true connection and healing seemed priceless. The pain of losing the money was minor compared to the agony she would have felt if this door to love had remained closed forever. After the retreat, everything became more intense. Darian's control crept into Marlene's everyday life like an invisible poison. There were daily exercises, meditations, writing tasks that were supposed to reach deep into her past. He sent her audio messages whose contents she shared only with him, sentences like, "Today I walked through your darkness, my light. I saw your fears and transformed them." Marlene lost touch with reality more and more. Her life revolved only around Darian, around his instructions, his words, his supposed needs. The world shrank to her screen and Darian's voice. Her own thoughts became quieter, drowned out by his interpretations of her feelings and her past. Whenever she doubted, whenever the inner emptiness returned, Darian's tone became sharper, his absence more noticeable. "I thought you wanted the connection, Marlene," he then said with disappointment in his voice. "I will not wait forever for you." He withdrew whenever she did not pay, whenever she did not show enough commitment. The financial demands became more regular, always justified by new energetic blockages or urgent healing phases. 5,400 intensive module, then 7,200 for a deep karmic release, finally 6,000 for a closing ritual that was supposed to seal their soul connection. He called it going deeper. Marlene called it desperation, which drove her to keep giving more and more in order to preserve the promise of love. Her accounts emptied, but the pain over the loss of the money was nothing compared to the fear of losing Darian, who had become her only support. The fear was a physical presence in her stomach, a cold knot tightening whenever Darian threatened to withdraw. She sacrificed her financial security for a feeling that increasingly felt like a drug, indispensable and yet destructive. Something inside Marlene rebelled, a quiet but persistent voice in her. She wanted out. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But Darian remained calm, composed. His words were like chains wrapping more tightly around her. "Do not forget the recordings, Marlene," he said in his usual meditative voice, but with an icy hardness she had never heard before. "We have shared things, very personal things, that could be misunderstood. I only want to protect your trust and our shared work." He had filmed everything. Every exercise, every ritual, the conversations in which Marlene had revealed her deepest fears and traumas. He had captured her tears, her most vulnerable moments, always under the pretext, "For your reflection, my love, so that you can see how far you have come." The recordings were not a tool of healing, but a weapon. Marlene knew that she could not leave him. The shame was immense. The thought that these private, intimate moments, which she had shared as a sign of her trust, could be exposed to the public was unbearable. She stayed silent and remained, locked in an invisible prison made of fear and blackmail, whose bars had been forged from her own hopes and weaknesses. The betrayal was so deep, so personal, that it took her breath away. She felt naked, exposed, and defenseless, caught in a net that she herself had helped spin while believing she was freeing herself. The pain of helplessness was almost unbearable. The change in Marlene did not go unnoticed. A colleague on the oncology ward, who had known Marlene for years, saw the emptiness in her eyes, the quiet apathy that had settled over her. Marlene had lost weight, seemed more fragile than ever. The colleague, concerned and alert, began to research. She found forum entries, first warnings, voices speaking of similar experiences with a relationship coach whose methods sounded disturbingly similar. The truth crept in slowly like a shadow spreading over Marlene's fogged reality. Darian was not new, only newly renamed. Again and again, the same scheme, the same spiritual language deliberately aimed at emotions. The same psychological profiles of the victims: nurses, educators, social professions, women with emotional exhaustion, and a deeply rooted helper complex. The truth hit Marlene like a blow. The illusion finally shattered. She collapsed. The ground beneath her feet seemed to sink away as the full perfidy of the deception came to light. A world full of lies that she had mistaken for reality. With the last of her strength, she consulted a solicitor, but Darian had never written an invoice, never made a real promise, only awakened expectations, fed dreams, and then brutally destroyed them. The legal situation was difficult because she had paid voluntarily, driven by manipulation, not by direct violence. But Marlene knew this was abuse. The destruction of her soul, the realization that everything she had believed in was a lie, tore her heart into 1,000 pieces. The shock was physically tangible, a cold grip holding her tightly and threatening to drag her into an abyss of despair. Today, Marlene lives alone in supported accommodation. Financially, she is ruined. Her inheritance, her savings, everything is gone. Emotionally, she is exhausted. The years of manipulation have left deep scars. But she is back in therapy. A difficult road back to life. One step at a time. Every day is a struggle, a small victory against the demons of the past. The fear of being deceived or manipulated again runs deep. But a spark of strength burns within her and drives her on. Publicly, she says nothing. The shame sits too deeply. The wounds are still too fresh. But in a written statement, which was later read out in court, she found her voice again. "I never thought that love could destroy without touch," it said. Her handwriting still trembling, but her words clear and unmistakable. "He never touched me, but he took my soul and used it against me." Darian. He is still active, under other names, in other cities, using the same scheme. His hunt for vulnerable souls continues. This story is a profound drama about emotional dependency, shame, and the silent destruction caused by lies. It shows that love scamming is not the result of naivety, but often the devastating consequence of deep longing, abused trust, and the deeply human desire to be needed and to find a true connection. Sometimes abuse does not begin with violence, but with a sentence like, "I see you." This story shows, sometimes the greatest crime is not the one that begins with noise and violence, but the one that grows in the shadows while the world looks away. The search for answers is often only the beginning of a much larger, darker truth. If this story affects you or if you would like to share your thoughts about it, feel free to write to us in the comments. I read everything. Because sometimes change does not begin with justice, but with listening.